Imagine standing at airport customs. You're coming home from vacation, and a border agent demands your unlocked smartphone. They threaten to seize it if you don't comply, right?
Yeah.
So, to protect your personal data, you tap in a secondary PN.
Right, which is just a built-in privacy feature you configured earlier.
Exactly. And to you, I mean, you are protecting yourself from an unlawful warrantless search. But the federal government, they view that exact same act as a felony. They consider it the intentional destruction of evidence to prevent a government seizure.
Yeah, it's wild. One person's standard digital hygiene is suddenly prosecuted as criminal obstruction. I mean, it forces a complete redefinition of what it means to hold private data in the modern era, especially at an international border.
Welcome to this brain candy analysis from Claire and Horatio. Our mission today is to examine this specific collision between digital privacy, border search laws, and, well, political activism.
Yeah.
Because this case asks a fundamental question, right? When does utilizing everyday digital security cross the line into criminal obstruction?
And the civil liberties implications here are just massive. Surveillance powers historically expand the moment ordinary privacy is framed as inherently suspicious.
But, the state has an equally compelling interest to consider here. A functioning legal system requires preserving evidence. Law enforcement has this constitutional mandate to investigate serious crimes. And if a suspect can just execute a purge command the second they get detained, the whole framework for gathering digital evidence basically collapses.
Right, so to understand how these two opposing views collided, we really have to look at what sparked this indictment. It's January 24th, 2025.
At Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport.
Exactly. Samuel Tunick, a U.S. citizen, is returning from a trip to the Dominican Republic. And when he gets to customs, his reentry is flagged.
Yeah, his detention was actually initiated by a Homeland Security email. This was circulated to Customs and Border Protection, so CBP, and a local FBI joint terrorism officer. The internal email stated Tunick was being investigated for, quote, suspected terrorism activities under an initiative known as NSPM-7.
But Tunick's defense team filed a motion to suppress the evidence. And their court filings frame this entire stop as a pretext. They allege it was just a fishing expedition targeting his political activism.
Right, and we should note here, Tunick is an outspoken opponent of the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center. Activists commonly refer to that as Cop City. And to be clear, we aren't endorsing the defense's viewpoint, we're just conveying the source material. But his lawyers argue the terrorism label was merely an excuse to detain an activist and seize his communications.
And the interrogation tactics do support the defense's claim that the stated reason for the stop, well, it shifted. According to the court documents, the federal agents didn't actually question Tunick about his activism or the training center.
Wait, really? They just dropped it?
Yeah, they pivoted completely. They started interrogating him about child sexual abuse material, or CSAM.
Which seems like a massive jump, right? I mean, why would border agents abandon a terrorism angle and suddenly pivot to a CSAM investigation?
Well, it comes down to legal geography and a highly specific court precedent. See, Atlanta falls under the jurisdiction of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. And back in 2018, the 11th Circuit handed down a ruling in a case called United States v. Toussaint.
Okay, and what did that establish?
The court basically ruled that border agents do not need reasonable suspicion to conduct an electronic device search if they're looking for child pornography.
Wow. So they essentially declared a digital device is no different than a physical suitcase.
Precisely. The court looked at the historical authority of customs agents. I mean, a border agent can rip open your physical luggage and inspect every pair of socks without any warrant or reasonable suspicion, just to make sure you aren't smuggling contraband.
Right.
So the 11th Circuit reasoned that digital contraband shouldn't get a special elevated shield just because it's stored on a hard drive instead of printed on photo paper.
Okay.
So legally speaking, invoking a CSAM investigation at the Atlanta airport acts as a skeleton key.
Ah, I see. It bypasses the need for a warrant or even reasonable suspicion, granting agents immediate authority to demand the device.
Exactly.
So Tunick finds himself in this interrogation room. His defense notes he was denied access to a lawyer 4 different times. He wasn't read his rights, he wasn't presented with a warrant, and agents threatened to seize his phone indefinitely if he refused to unlock it.
Which is a huge amount of pressure.
Right. So finally, he complies. But he doesn't enter his primary password. He enters a duress password. The government's indictment states the phone screen went blank, flashed several times, and restarted. The contents were completely purged.
And that action led to a federal indictment in November 2025. Tunick was charged under Title 18 U.S. Code, Section 2232A.
Which is a felony, right?
Yeah, it's a felony statute carrying up to 5 years in prison for destroying or removing property to prevent its seizure by the government. The Public Defender's Office actually pointed out the rarity of this. In the last 30 years, there's only been one other indictment under this specific statute in the Northern District of Georgia. And it involved a drug trafficking case, not a smartphone wipe.
But here's the thing. To claim he destroyed evidence to thwart a lawful search, the government has to prove the search was actually lawful. The entire obstruction charge hinges on the phrase lawful authority.
Right.
If the detention and the interrogation violated his Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights, like his defense argues, the foundation of the government's case gets very shaky.
Well, the CBP operates under a 2018 directive asserting pretty broad authority to conduct warrantless digital searches to ensure compliance with customs laws.
Right. They draw a line between a basic manual search like scrolling through your photos or text, which requires no suspicion, and an advanced forensic search where they actually connect the phone to extraction hardware.
Exactly. They claim that advanced search requires reasonable suspicion, but they also grant themselves the leeway to detain devices for days or even indefinitely to conduct it.
And Tunick's lawyers are attacking that premise head-on, because you can't charge a man with destroying evidence if you had no constitutional right to seize that evidence in the first place. But this brings us to the actual mechanism of the alleged destruction.
Yeah, because the government is treating this digital wipe as the physical destruction of property alike. He took a hammer and smashed a hard drive.
Exactly. To evaluate that claim, we have to look at the software Tunick was actually running on his Google Pixel. It's an operating system called GrapheneOS.
And people often hear the phrase custom operating system and immediately associate it with rooting or jailbreaking a phone. They picture a hacker tool that strips away the manufacturer's safety locks.
Which is counterintuitive because rooting a phone gives apps administrative access to the entire system. If you're trying to secure your data from a forensic extraction tool, opening up administrative access is the absolute worst thing you could do.
Right. GrapheneOS does the exact opposite. The installation process involves unlocking the bootloader just long enough to flash the new hardened operating system and then relocking the bootloader.
Okay, so it locks the doors back up behind it.
Exactly. It utilizes Android's verified boot, which is a form of hardware attestation. Every single time the phone turns on, it cryptographically proves that the core operating system hasn't been tampered with.
So it's essentially taking the open source foundation of Android and building a fortress around it. It strips out unnecessary background code to just reduce the attack surface.
Yeah, and it also implements advanced exploit mitigations, like a hardened memory allocator.
How does that work?
Well, think of a smartphone's temporary memory, like a really chaotic high-speed filing room. When an app needs space, it grabs an empty folder. When it's done, it throws the folder back in the pile.
Right.
A common way hackers take over a phone, like a heap memory corruption, is by slipping a malicious instruction into one of those discarded folders before it gets properly shredded, hoping the system accidentally executes it later.
Oh, I see. So the hardened memory allocator meticulously shreds and reorganizes everything. It ensures there are no open slots or lingering data packets for an attacker to hijack.
It goes even further than that. GrapheneOS features automatic reboot protections. So if you haven't unlocked your device in a set amount of time, the phone just reboots itself.
Which does what, exactly?
It clears all the sensitive encryption keys out of the temporary memory, returning the phone to its absolute most secure state, known as at rest.
But, a lot of people who want privacy still need to use normal apps. You might want to protect your data from forensic extraction, but you still need your banking app or ride shares or maps, and those usually require Google Play services to function.
Sure. And Grapheneo handles that through a sandbox compatibility layer. See, on a standard Android phone, Google Play Services is baked into the core of the system with massive unrevocable privileges.
Right, it can see everything.
Yeah. But GrapheneOS treats Google Play like a contractor. It installs it as a normal, unprivileged app and locks it in a single room. It can perform its specific job for the apps that need it, but it isn't allowed to wander the halls or access data outside its strict sandbox.
And this brings us to the feature at the center of the indictment, right? The duress credential.
Yeah, this is the big one. GrapheneOS allows a user to configure a secondary PIN. If you're forced to hand over your phone and you type that secondary PIN into the lock screen, the device triggers a cryptographic wipe.
It securely erases all user data and all eSIMs. It doesn't just lock the phone. It chemically burns the digital files so they cannot be recovered.
And we should emphasize, These tools are incredibly powerful, but they're not inherently nefarious. They serve vital, perfectly lawful functions for a lot of vulnerable populations.
Right, consider a journalist traveling across a border to meet a confidential source, or a domestic abuse survivor who needs absolute certainty an abuser cannot install stalkerware to track their location.
Yeah, or traveling business executives who use these tools to protect trade secrets. Even the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, the NACDL, they published a primer explicitly warning attorneys about the dangers of border searches.
Because they highlighted how exposed lawyers are at customs. I mean, their devices are packed with attorney-client privileged communications. And the CBP's rules on handling privileged data are incredibly nebulous.
Very. An officer is instructed to seek clarification from the traveler about what files are privileged and then consult CBP legal counsel.
But there is no enforceable technical barrier preventing an agent from just copying the entire device. So a lawyer utilizing a duress PN at the border might simply be executing their ethical duty to protect client data from a warrantless dragnet.
Exactly.
Which raises a really crucial question. If GrapheneOS is so secure and it provides this incredible defense against data harvesting and forensic hacking, why do consumers have to go through all the trouble of replacing their factory operating system? I mean, why isn't this level of privacy simply the default for every smartphone on the market?
Well, it's not a grand conspiracy to monitor citizens, if that's what you mean. The default smartphone ecosystem is driven by business models and financial incentives. Standard operating systems are built entirely around advertising and telemetry.
So collecting data on app usage, location history, search habits.
Right, because that data is a highly lucrative commodity. And proprietary service lock-in keeps consumers trapped within a specific brand's ecosystem, which generates recurring revenue.
And carriers also want control. They lock bootloaders so they can pre-install their own undeletable bloatware in partner apps. But there is also a technical friction point with third-party apps, isn't there? Like when you install a custom operating system, you run into issues with things like Google's Play Integrity API.
Oh yeah, that API is a major roadblock. A lot of banking apps, government portals, and even just mobile games use the Play Integrity API to ping the phone's hardware and check if it's running a manufacturer-approved stock operating system.
And if you change your OS to a secure alternative like GrapheneOS, the API flags the environment as unrecognized. So the bank might simply refuse to launch the app.
Yeah, and to be fair, I understand why a bank wants a known environment. They're trying to prevent fraud. When they see a stock iPhone or a standard Android, they know exactly what security environment they're dealing with.
It drastically reduces their customer support costs, too.
Right, they don't have to troubleshoot for non-technical users who accidentally broke their own phones by installing conflicting software. The legitimate security argument for tightly controlled proprietary platforms is based entirely on scale and convenience. The manufacturers are basically protecting the average user from themselves.
But the moral consequence of that convenience is severe, because privacy shouldn't be a specialist hobby reserved only for technically confident power users.
No, it shouldn't.
And sure, GrapheneOS uses a modern browser-based installer now, which is vastly easier than the old days of manually sideloading custom ROMs through a command line. But the barriers to entry remain massive.
Yeah, you still have to buy a specific brand of phone, immediately wipe it, figure out how to unlock the bootloader, manage data cables, and just accept the risk that your mobile banking or your favorite game might just stop working.
It demands a level of technical bravery and compromise that most everyday people simply do not have the time or energy for.
And that barrier to entry is what creates the central dilemma of this entire federal case. Because advanced privacy is not the default, utilizing it makes you an anomaly. You stand out. And to law enforcement, anomalies require investigation.
But the moment privacy becomes suspicious, we enter very dangerous territory. You're effectively treated as guilty simply because you closed the blinds on your own house.
Well, we have to analyze how law enforcement actually perceive these tools, right? There was reporting out of Catalonia where a regional anti-drug official noted that simply spotting a suspect using a Google Pixel prompts immediate suspicion.
Wait, just having a pixel?
Yeah, because certain organized crime groups adopted pixels, running GrapheneOS for their internal networks. Now, we shouldn't exaggerate a single quote into a formal national Spanish policy, but it illustrates the law enforcement mindset perfectly. The tool itself becomes a red flag.
But criminals use stock iPhones every single day. They use regular Androids, they drive Toyota sedans, they spend US dollars. Using the same brand of phone as a criminal syndicate shouldn't equate to probable cause.
True, But the distinction lies between a general-purpose tool and a dedicated criminal service. See, GrapheneOS is a lawful open-source project. It is vastly different from something like EncroChat.
Right, EncroChat was a specialized, heavily modified network built almost exclusively for organized crime.
Exactly. They physically removed the GPS and camera modules from the phones and charged thousands of dollars in crypto just for subscription. Treating the mere possession of an open-source privacy OS as a clue of guilt, well, it fundamentally alters the presumption of innocence in the justice system.
The state will counter, though, that a democracy relies on the rule of law. And the border is a unique legal zone. The government has a paramount constitutional interest in knowing what and who is entering the country to protect national security.
Yeah, and if a suspect can intentionally execute a cryptographic wipe program while actively being detained by a federal agent, the state loses its ability to enforce the law entirely.
Because the courts have historically agreed that Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure are significantly diminished at international borders.
Right. The government is arguing that Tunic didn't just passively refuse to provide a password. He took an affirmative, destructive action to thwart a lawful customs procedure.
But a democracy crosses a highly dangerous line when it treats encryption, secure defaults, or resistance to warrantless access as proof of criminal intent. And when you throw in the context of left-wing political activism, the implications get much darker.
They really do.
Is this airport border search a necessary security measure, or has it become a constitutional loophole? Has a system originally designed to catch weapons smugglers and terrorists been exploited to conduct a domestic political investigation into a citizen who just opposes a police training facility?
The courts will have to weigh the evidence to determine where that balance lands. The defense is adamant the stop was a pretext. The prosecution is adamant Tunic knowingly destroyed digital property to blind a lawful investigation.
And because this case is pending, the final outcome remains unknown, but the eventual ruling will completely rewrite the rulebook for how digital borders operate.
Absolutely.
And the ripple effects of this indictment extend far beyond activists or people running custom operating systems. Consider how this logic applies to everyday applications. Let's say the courts decide that wiping a device during a border stop is officially a federal felony. What happens to the millions of everyday users who have auto-deleting messages enabled on apps like Signal or WhatsApp?
The legal definition of destruction becomes incredibly murky there.
Right. You travel internationally. You hand your unlocked phone to a customs agent at the border. And while the agent is scrolling through your device, a timer expires on a Signal chat, and a highly sensitive conversation permanently deletes itself right in front of them. Did you just commit a felony?
I mean, you configured the application to destroy data, knowing you would eventually cross a border.
Exactly. Where does routine digital privacy end and the malicious destruction of evidence begin? Is your smartphone an extension of your mind that deserves ultimate protection, or is it just a filing cabinet that the government always has the right to pry open at the border?
If the justice system cannot distinguish between an automated privacy feature and the intentional destruction of evidence, every single citizen carrying a modern smartphone is walking a very precarious line at customs.
We test this exact tension in our companion debate, Candy, where we argue whether smartphone privacy should be the mandated default even when it actively frustrates law enforcement investigations. Be sure to check that out. For more Brain Candy, companion debate candy, news briefings, and classic audiobooks, visit clarineratio.com.